Do you want to introduce Brad?
Sure.
Because I feel like he's another one that I always introduce him all the time, and I'm always trying to tell people, like, these aren't my friends. It's because I keep having, this is like Brad's second time in 6 weeks, and same thing last week with,
Paul. Yeah.
yes, Paul. And I'm like, that's really not the case. Brad's filling in for us.
Sure.
And you left before we got to see. We sang and you were not there.
Yeah, we did.
My system went down, and I thought that the host went down, and I didn't come back in.
I can't get it.
Just as we were ready, it was unstable. Well, I'm unstable. Technology is our
Technology is our friend.
The weekend. My kids do it.
I'm depressed, but I'm
How are you folks?
well, we're here.
Not very happy today. Other than snowball game.
We have a light crowd today. I wonder if people are like
Depressed.
so depressed with the results of last night's game. Yeah, they're staying up. Tom DeWitt, I'm proud of you for being here today. Would you please lead us in our invocation?
Gracious Heavenly Father, we pause on this beautiful winter day, thankful for all the many blessings that you have bestowed on us individually and collectively, not the least of which is the love that we share with the rest of human race through Rotary. We ask that you bless this food to the nourishment of our bodies and us to your service in this community. We ask that you give wisdom to our national leaders, patience and understanding to those seeking to find peaceful solutions to conflict around the world, and protect those that protect us both home and abroad. We ask all these things each in our own way. Amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail, and the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous night o'er the rampant walls were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the most bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you. Please be seated. I don't know about you guys, but that sounded really great from my perspective up here.
Bill, Coates.
I want to welcome everybody today to our meeting. Courtney, you said we don't have any guests, I don't believe, today, so, all right, well, we're going to turn it over to our sports moment. We know the big sports moment, but talk to us.
Okay, we didn't do it last week. We gave a time to Paul. I enjoyed his program. Of course, the Super Bowl last night was something that most of us watched. I don't get it right very often, but I got that one right last night. There's no saying among people who try to pick football games, before you tell me who's going to win, if I can tell you who's going to win, you got to tell me who's going to play. I mean, that's 90% of football. You can have the best skilled players in the game, but if your offensive linemen are out, ask Dak Prescott of the Cowboys, now that's working out for him. And Kansas City had a left tackle, a really, really good left tackle, who was out last night. And so they had a jumbled up offensive line, and I thought going in was that Tampa's pass rush was going to wreak havoc, and that's exactly what happened. So, I mean, that kid was running for his life all night long. So anyway, doesn't mean he's not a great player, and won't be back again, but last night was his night, and the night for the Kansas City Chiefs. Two other things that happened over the weekend. One really excited me. Drew Pearson was elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame at the senior committee on Saturday. Well deserved. I've known Drew for 30 years. Worked in the Dallas market. Just known him and worked with him for a long time. I was very, very excited about that. And he kind of almost went unnoticed over the weekend. The Texas Rangers traded the last vestige of their back-to-back American League Championship teams in 2010 and 2011, Elvis Andrus, their shortstop, to the Oakland Athletics. So the Rangers obviously rebuilding right now. They got this beautiful new ballpark, and you can't go to games. Well, they'll have a few people there this year. It'll be better than last year, but nobody got to go. But they're about to start baseball season under not quite the same cloud that they did a year ago, but still limited capacity, probably not knowing what they're getting into this year. They say they're going to start on April 1st. We'll see, but kind of an interesting sports weekend. Thanks a lot.
Johnny. Thank you, Bill.
Bill, the season starts April 1st. That's what they're saying right now.
Johnny is going to do something different today instead of the member spotlight. Do you want to just ask them to stand up first? And then, okay. So if you were currently wearing a Rotary pin of any sort, not your name badge, but a Rotary pin such as the wheel or your Paul Harris Fellows, please stand up. Or if you're wearing one of your pins today.
All
right, you wanna talk about? I have mine on, you can't see them very well because they hide in my sweater.
So what we're doing is, this thing's hot. So what we're doing is just to encourage Brandy, and whenever she asks me to do this, I'm like, I need the cone of shame. So we're going to be handing out these tickets, and they're going to be for the drawing that we're going to be doing. Just a little bit. Looks like the odds are going to be really good that one of you will win something along the way.
They're both winners,
They're
so
both
you
winners.
don't have to do the drawings.
Okay. Save the ticket.
Yeah.
So for next week, remember to bring your branding, and myself included. And so the winners today are going to win some customized South Tyler Rotary Club posters for your iced tea on your desk. Iced tea. Come on, or I'll bring them up to you. 2 each.
Yep, 2 each. Thank you. Okay, so that didn't quite go over as much as I thought it would. I thought we'd have a whole lot more people in here with their Rotary bling on them. And the reason that I did this is because, you know, I'm proud of the organization that we're in, and to be honest, I wear my pins every Monday. But I probably don't wear them Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Definitely not over the weekend. So, but, you know, one of the ways for people to learn more about us is to wear our pins, because then they go, oh, what's that pin? What's that about? You know, I've got this really pretty one up here that has, you know, 4 sapphires in it, and this little thing that hangs off of it. I forget what that's called, but so somebody may ask me, my coworkers ask me about it all the time. So it's just a good way to open up a dialogue about what Rotary is and why you're involved. So, not necessarily doing it again next week, but keep that in mind, because the little coasters were things that I made at the Innovation Pipeline. If you're familiar with the Innovation Pipeline, it's an organization here in Tyler that's membership based, and they have all sorts of fancy tools that you can do fun things with. All right, I do not see Dalton in the crowd. Don't forget we're doing our Super Bowl. You can bring your food. There's actually, I didn't realize this, but there's a box over there underneath that TV that says Super Bowl Pack, and it's a shared project with the First Christian Church in South Tyler, Rotary. So if you just want to bring your stuff, and I appreciate those who have made online donations to PATH. And we're going to do a Pass the Hat at the next meeting, which is the 22nd, 21st. We don't meet next Monday, the 15th. That is President's Day, so we are not holding a meeting, so don't forget about that.
Madam President?
Yes.
Could I announce who's going to be at the 22nd Arts Food Arts
Yeah,
Meeting?
sure. Mike.
Oh, thank you. This is. Anyway, just very quickly, our speaker on the 22nd is going to be Bishop Strickland, who is an honorary member of this club. When I asked first, I had to go through several layers to get to him, but they were very excited about him being there. So he will be here on the 22nd, and I told him, I said, you talk about anything you want to talk about. So I'm looking forward to it. So anyway, that's what I got.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Tom Steele, I probably caught you as you were taking a bite of food. Anything about dues you want to announce, or the March Madness?
Well, we sold about half of the tickets for March Madness. So, we've got a good start. Dues are in good shape. Most of the time here, make your dues. If you're not making dues, hey,
All right, so for those of you on YouTube who may not have been able to hear that, don't forget to pay your dues. And we're doing March Madness. We sold probably about half the spots. They're $10 a piece. If you're interested in participating, if you're not making it to the meetings, reach out to Tom Steele and we'll figure out a way to make it work for you. Beth is on YouTube. She said she apologizes. She couldn't make it here today. She has a work commitment, and so she just wants you to remember that we're switching up the spaghetti supper a little bit. It's going to be May 20th, I believe, is the date. And she's looking for people to help serve on the committee, the planning committee, the actual meal prep. We're going to do things a little bit differently this year, where we're going to do more of a delivery service, then we're not gonna have the traditional one, but we're still gonna need everybody in here to help sell tickets for it, sell sponsors. We were able to, I know it was a Friday night, and it went really quickly, which was nice, but I wanted to just do a quick recap of what they went over there, and if Jeff Johnston would come up front. Please, Jeff. He's waiting. So we were recognized during the South Tyler Rotary was recognized for Jeff's year of service as being an End Polio Now Club. So it's presented in appreciation of our financial support of End Polio Now. We also were, which one is this? This is the 100% Foundation Giving Club, which means 100% of our members contributed to the Rotary Foundation during that time period. And lastly, we have, if somebody could take a picture for us when we're done, we have every Rotarian, every year club, which means that we have $100 per capita and 100% member participation. So thanks to Jeff and all of his hard work, and Tom DeWitt, you should probably be up here since you're the one who, he says no, okay.
He's still mourning. One, two, three. Pull the paper down just a little bit. What the paper covers? Nice.
Thank you. At the foundation dinner, we also did some recognition. We received some recognition. Harris Fellows, I'm just going to recognize the folks that are in the room. Courtney Klepper was recognized as a new Paul Harris Fellows, as well as our Bowman. I don't think any of our +1s are here. John McDougal, John Gentry, Carol Conover, Kimberly Ashley, +2s. Paul Harris +3, Beth Blaisdell, David Roberts, Amanda Fulmer, +4, Tom Steele and myself, +5, I think all of these folks are in the room, Ann DeWitt, John Hart, Jeff Johnston, and Jim Rollins. And then Lee Montgomery was recognized for his major donor level and Bequest Society level as well. We have 4 members in our club who are Paul Harris Society members, and if you're not familiar with that, that means that we've pledged to donate at least $1,000 a year to the Rotary Foundation. That's Beth Blaisdell, Tom DeWitt, myself, and Lee Montgomery. So if you've never made a contribution to the Rotary Foundation, then see Tom DeWitt or myself, John Hart, Tom Steele, will walk you through the process. So, that being said, I think any announcements from the floor before we start our program? I'm not seeing any. Got to get the bio first. We all know him. Yeah, and I got it. No, yeah, we'll leave that.
Sorry.
Okay. All right, here we go. So our speaker today is our own Brad Hall, and he's going to talk about Keep On Trucking. Brad was born in Longview, so this is really small text. He's practically a lifelong East Texan. He has family in Tyler, and he moved here shortly after graduating high school. He attended UT Tyler. Prior to moving back to East Texas, he spent time in Dallas, Little Rock, and Shreveport. He came back here in 1990 to raise his family, and he spent 17 years in the car business, sales manager at King Chevrolet until it sold in 2005, and then at Paul GMC until 2010. And now he's at Southeast Freight Lines as account manager. One thing you may not know about Brad, and we should know this because this was the last time he spoke, we talked about it. I know, it's the same bio. So he was a disc jockey in the early 80s here in East Texas. We know that he's an avid bowler, and he's been a member of South Tyler Rotary since 2005, and obviously he's our secret spaghetti sauce maker. He has a blended family of 6 children and 7 grandchildren, all living here in Tyler, and he is a member here at First Christian Church. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Rotarians, I present to you Brad Hall.
Okay, my advice to you, if you don't want to get trapped and you have to come up here twice, don't sit with Colleen.
For the record, I heard that table encouraged her to sit with you guys.
Actually,
voted in.
we were
Yeah,
trying to
voted
play some
in.
music at the old man table. So, okay, hi everybody. I'm going to talk today about trucking. May not be the most exciting topic on the planet, but 2020 kind of changed our perspectives maybe in the trucking industry. Let me first give you a little bit of background about the company I work for, Southeastern Freight Lines. We started in 1950 by a gentleman named W.T. Castle Sr. out of Columbia, South Carolina. He started with 12 trucks and trailers, 3 pickup trucks, and 13 employees, along with a $5,000 bank loan. In 2018, Southeastern Freight Lines exceeded $1 billion in revenue. We're the 10th largest carrier in the U.S., and we are the biggest and the best in the Sun Belt. So before I get into the presentation, let's talk a little bit about 2020 and truck drivers. I'm not going to read that. Hopefully you can read it to yourself. A recent quote on Twitter, which is what this is, went viral. If you ask a truck driver, they just want to do their jobs and they want to provide for their families. In 2020, though, they ranked right up there with nurses, doctors, frontline workers during the height of the pandemic. Little history on the industry. Prior to World War I, small trucking companies really just moved goods from rail yards to final destinations. There was really no trucking companies like we know today. When World War I hit, the federal government nationalized the railroad for the war effort, which created the trucking industry that we know today. There was a whole new demand for moving goods. There were some drawbacks to this new program of trucking moving across country. First of all, there wasn't any such thing as a gas station. Kind of hard to believe, but in 1913, gas was sold by blacksmith shops, hardware stores, and general stores. There was no such thing as a truck stop. There was no such thing as 24-hour fuel. 7-Elevens didn't exist. Love's didn't exist. And there was a lack of paved roads. In fact, in Tyler, there were 11 brick streets in 1912, and a total of 25 brick streets in 1925. So if you wanted to move freight or anything from one city to another, you were either on dirt or gravel roads. And the freight business was slow. Transportation was slow. It took over a month to get freight from east to west, if it got there at all. In 1914, there were 100,000 trucks in existence on the road in the U.S. And those trucks weren't even trucks like we know today. They were actually converted cars made into trucks. By 1920, just a brief 6 years later, there were over 1 million true trucks on the road. Those truck companies were mainly White and Mack. All right, so how does the trucking industry impact us, the U.S. economy? It pretty much impacts 100% of everything we do. All commodities at some point will pass through on a truck. Our daily life is impacted by trucking. Houses, clothes, food, cars, everything. In fact, if we didn't have trucking, we would be standing here in a field, hopefully wearing FitBoots. That's about the best we can expect without the trucking industry. A little breakdown on the industry itself. The transportation industry is an $800 billion industry in the U.S. That's larger than the gross domestic product of Saudi Arabia. The trucking or transportation industry is broken down in several aspects. I'm only going to talk about LTL because that's what we do. FTL, which is considered full truckload, that's about 37.5% of the total transportation that's in the economy. Private fleet amounts for 36.7%. Private fleet would be something like Walmart trucks or transportation, Target, even Brookshire's has their own private fleet. My side of the industry, which is LTL, which stands for less than truckload, only accounts for about 6.5% of the industry.
There's about 75 LTL carriers in the country. Most of those carriers are regional, and I would challenge anybody out here to be able to name more than 4 or 5 carriers, but they impact our lives every day. It is an $800 billion industry, as I mentioned. Okay, to talk a little bit about the difference between LTL and FTL. Full truckload, it's pretty simple. You get a full truck, and you get a driver, you pick freight up, and you go deliver point A to point B, there's nothing in between. LTL, on the other hand, is a little more complex. The LTL industry has route drivers that go out, deliver freight, and once they empty their trailers out, they start picking up freight in different locations in the area, and they bring it back to a terminal where they unload and then reload onto what we refer to as line haul or over-the-road trucks. And then it goes and delivers to either an intermediate terminal or a hub, or break bulk, whatever you want to call it, in between, until it reaches its final destination, where it's then unloaded and reloaded onto the final destination truck. So, if we pick freight up in Tyler, it's going to get touched a minimum of 5 times before it gets delivered to the end user or the final destination. Quite a bit different than the full truckload side of the business. This is what we refer to as a load plan. All those lines on that map is a route out of Tyler. So if you'll notice, going east, if we hit Atlanta, that's our big hub going east, and then west is where we hit Dallas. That is the daily routing out of Tyler, which doesn't look too impressive, I guess. It's kind of small, but just look at the whole company.
Wow.
That's one day. That is our daily load plan for the entire company. We're a small company. We're only the 10th largest, so multiply that times 75 companies that do what we do, and then add the 96,000 full truckload companies out there. There's a lot of freight moving on the roads. There's a lot of truck traffic. You probably know that. Just so you know, by looking at this map, you can tell that a lot of freight moves through Atlanta. Atlanta is the southern freight hub for the industry and also for Southeastern freight lines. 1 in 8 shipments for us moves through Atlanta. How does the industry impact our economy? 11.5 billion tons are moved by truck annually. To put that into perspective, one 53-foot trailer will handle about 22 tons. So that's equal to 261.5 million loads a year. $8.3 trillion worth of goods moves by truck. 72% of all freight moves by truck. When you refer to all freight, that also includes pipeline and air transportation. So we are impacted 100% by the freight industry, but some transporting of goods actually is handled by a couple of other ways. It's an $800 billion industry, which I mentioned earlier, and trucking would, on its own, would rank as the 17th largest economy in the world. So you think there's a lot of trucks on the road today? Guess what? I just mentioned 11.5 million tons handled right now. By 2040, they expect that to be 29 billion tons. So take the trucks you see today and a little more than double by the year 2040. The top 25 LTL carriers, which is what we do, we handle about 90% of the total volume of freight in our side of the industry. The new players don't really get into the LTL side of the business because it's just too expensive. It's cost prohibitive. So when an LTL carrier fails, the lost capacity from that company is absorbed into existing carriers. The top 10 full truckload carriers, on the other hand, make up only 5% of the total volume, and full truckload carriers come and go constantly because most of the full truckload carriers are small mom and pop organizations. They're a single man or maybe a couple, and when they get ready to retire, they're out. Talked about how many trucks there are on the road. There's a lot of trucks on the road. 36 million trucks are registered, not counting farm trucks. Nearly 4 million of those are Class 8 trucks. Class 8 trucks are those that pull trailers from 28 to 53 feet. Those 4 million trucks travel about 182 billion miles a year. If you want to put that into perspective, it's 3.67 million miles from Earth to Pluto. So the trucking industry can make about 25 round trips to Pluto every year.
Wow.
We have about 892,000 for-hire carriers. 97% of those, like I mentioned, operate fewer than 20 trucks. It's about 8 million people employed in the trucking and transportation industry. 3.5 million of those are drivers. By comparison, there's 8 million also in financial services. So anytime you see a banker or a financial analyst, you can add one to that, and that's the blue collar industry of transportation. So we're equal as far as employment. 13.4% of all registered vehicles on the road are trucks. Our industry pays about $17.7 billion a year in federal highway taxes and almost $26 billion a year on average in state highway taxes. For every gallon of fuel that we purchase, we pay 24.4 cents to the Fed for taxes, and on average 27.4 cents to the state for taxes. To keep that in mind, just to keep in the back of your mind, those Class 8 trucks I mentioned a few minutes ago, they get about 6 miles to the gallon. So 52 cents every time one of them rolls down the road 1 mile, we're paying some taxes. You're welcome. Okay, so how does the industry do overall? In 2018, that was a banner year. It was the best year that the industry had seen in probably 30 or more years. Carriers were at or near full capacity, which pushed rates up, especially full truckload side. Strong economy and the driver shortage caused in part by the DOT law changes were the reason for the capacity shrinkage. So in 2019, wasn't quite as good a year. We had 795 companies that went out of business in the trucking industry. We had a total loss of 24,000 trucks on the road due to business closure. The largest carrier that went out was the 17th largest in the country. It's called New England Motor Freight. They were mainly up in the Northeast. They were weighed down by thin margins because they got in bed really deep with Amazon, and that pretty much put them under. But before you feel sorry for the owner, her name is Nancy Chevelle. She's better known as Mrs. Paul McCartney. So she's doing okay. A couple of others that went out, Southbound was a truckload offering that went out of business in 2019, and another regional LTL carrier called LME, which worked in the Midwest, they went out. So 2020 came up, and what happened? You talk about supply chain disruption. Remember when you couldn't get toilet paper? Or cream of chicken soup? For about 3 months? Well, that wasn't our fault. That was a manufacturing site. We had trucks to move the freight to the distribution centers. They just didn't have the freight to give us. So the coronavirus was thought to have had a significant negative impact on the trucking industry. And for about 6 weeks it did. Our industry shrank by about 20%. But then the end of April hit, and all of a sudden our industry went through the roof. We were begging for people to come to work. We didn't have enough people on the dock. We didn't have enough drivers. We were looking for and scrambling. And it was every if you couldn't make money in the trucking industry in 2020, you had some serious issues. I mention that because you guys in the room can all claim to be proud partial owners of a company called YRC, thanks to the PPP loan back in the early part of 2020. YRC is a very large transportation company, trucking company, and they have been struggling financially for years. So tucked away in that PPP loan back in 2020 was a $700 million bailout in exchange for the federal government taking a 29.6% stake in the company. So that powerful company is trading at about $5 a share right now, just in case you wanted to sell your barge. Here's a kind of interesting side note on that. So they loaned them $700 million to keep them afloat. They do have 30,000 employees. I mean, I'm not going to say whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. I can tell you from the trucking industry, we couldn't absorb that lost capacity if they were to go out. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. But their biggest customer is the Department of Defense. So while we loaned them $700 million from the federal government, the Department of Defense is actually suing them for misrepresenting their rates for the last 8 or 9 years. And they're suing them for millions and millions of dollars. So I don't really get the take there.
So if you have fabrication of the federal government suing itself.
Much.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Stephen said the federal government is suing itself, so yeah, that's pretty much it now. YRC probably should have gone out 10 or 15 years ago. They didn't. Here again, I'm not here to make a political statement about how I really feel about that. Okay, so getting into the freight industry, if you're want to get in the full truckload side of the business, it's pretty easy. Buy a truck, get a trailer, get a CDL, get your name out there on the load boards, and I got it, you're a trucker. You can do it as long as you want. You can probably make a pretty good living. My side of the industry, which is LTL, is a little more difficult. New players, like I mentioned earlier, they don't exist. Existing carriers are consolidating out the weaker carriers, and it's happening constantly. In fact, we just had a sale in our industry maybe 2 weeks ago. A company called UPS. UPS owned a freight division, which was referred to as UPS Freight. They bought a company called Overnight about 20 years ago, paid $1.5 billion for them, and just sold them in January for $800 million. I think they were glad to get out of the LTL side of the business. So, some of the barriers to getting into the LTL side of the freight industry, first of all, it's hard to get land, hard to get facilities, and even harder to get people. For example, our company, the company I work for, Southeastern, we operate in 13 states. We have 89 facilities, 3,000 tractors and 8,500 trailers, 500 straight trucks, 1,200 forklifts, and about 9,000 people. So if you want to get into the freight business and compete, you got to start pretty much right there. It's a very, very mass capital outlet within the freight business. What are some of the obstacles about our business? Same thing you guys have. Congestion. That's a picture of, they refer to it as Spaghetti Junction in Atlanta, Georgia.
Hate driving through that.
Yeah. Delays cost the freight industry $63 billion a year, almost 1 billion hours of lost productivity. To put that into perspective, the average individual spends about 100 hours a year delayed by traffic congestion. Our industry, trucking delays equates to 362,243 truck drivers sitting idle for a year. It's a lot of money, $63 billion. About the only time you really hear about our industry is when you're watching the news and some of those lawyer firms are on there talking about how bad truckers really are. Well, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration begs to differ just a little bit. These are their stats, not our industry stats. For every 100 million miles driven, there's 1.1 fatal accidents. The average cost per wreck, if there's a fatality, $3 million. If there's not a fatality, the average cost is about $62,000. But here's the interesting statistic. First of all, 70% of fatal truck passenger accidents are a result of unsafe actions of the car driver, not the truck driver. I can tell you that in the 12 years now that I've been in Southeastern Freight Lines, we've had 2 fatalities in Tyler. One of them, a lady actually committed suicide. Our driver was crossing the 2-lane bridge over Cedar Creek Lake. And the driver of the car, which the car was stolen, and she had stolen someone's identity. And she veered into his lane and he had nowhere to go. So not only did she kill herself, but she put our driver, who was still working for us, through an incredible amount of trauma. And then we had another one in Kilgore. This was about 9 years ago, I guess. It was one of our customers. Our driver was stopped at the red light. He was driving a 3/4-ton pickup behind him. There was never a sign of him applying the brakes at all. And he rear-ended our trailer. And if you've got a 6,000-pound pickup truck up against a 30,000-pound tractor trailer, guess who's going to do that? It's really unfortunate. And they actually determined that he had apparently dropped something in his floorboard and moved over to pick it up. And when he hit our truck. So the 2 fatalities that I can personally attest to were neither one the fault of the driver. Only 1.4% of truck accidents are actually caused by driver fatigue. That's the one that they always talk about on TV during those commercials. All right. What's the future of trucking? Well, we have some alternative fuels we can use. And we're using a little bit of it. CNG, compressed natural gas. Southeastern's not using it, but there is an LTL company in Houston that is using some CNG. It doesn't work very well in our area because we don't have enough refueling options. We really only have one, but our taxi company, I believe they are using CNG. Another option is hydrogen. It's hard to store, but it may become viable in the future. The most talked about, probably the most likely change, if there is a change, would be electric power. There's a company called Nikola that's developed a lithium battery powered truck that's capable of continuous recharging. This is a little ironic, but it's continuous recharging using a natural gas charger. I know this sounds a little odd, but natural gas doesn't power a big truck as well as electricity will. They claim that truck will run about 1,200 miles between actually having to stop and recharge fully. The current electric truck option only has about 150-mile range, which until that improves, you're not going to see much change in how we're operating today. But as soon as there's an alternative to diesel fuel that makes sense financially, the trucking industry will move and move quickly. So more of the future of trucking. Autonomy is here. Self-driving trucks are here. That is something our industry's been fighting with and fighting for a long time. Mainly because Gen Z and millennials just aren't that interested in truck driving jobs. But I can tell you that you can be 21 years old, high school diploma, have a CDL, and make $80,000 a year. That's not too bad for 21 years old. Plus have incredible benefits. But it's just not interesting to our young people, not like it was 25 or 30 years ago. Self-driving trucks, like I said, are here. As soon as that return on investment is viable, the industry will obviously buy into that technology. It's not going to replace drivers, just like the autopilot and jet aircraft didn't replace pilots in planes. The technology for driving self-driving trucks will have a much larger impact on us economically than a soccer mom and her self-driving SUV. But the technology is here for both of us. And if you can see this, the picture here, that's 4 trucks running about 8 feet apart from each other. That is referred to as platooning. That's something that once you see self-driving trucks, and I think we may see that in our lifetime. I'm thinking that the self-driving truck phenomenon is coming, but platooning is where they tether these trucks together wirelessly so they can run down an interstate. This actually is much more efficient. And you're even looking for better efficiencies, not just with diesel fuel, but also with, if you can get 10% more out of an electric charge, you're still miles ahead. So, that is it. We've been here 71 years, and we're a privately held, non-union carrier out of Columbia, South Carolina. Any questions about the freight industry?
Yeah, is there any issues out there about increasing the length? Like you have the tractor, the trailer, and then have another trailer. In Australia, they might have like 2 or 3 trailers being pulled at one time.
Okay, so the question is, can you, right now, it depends on what state you're in. Right now in Texas, the longest you can have is 55 feet.
Okay.
Doesn't matter how many trailers you can put in there. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. The longest you can have is 56 feet. That is probably changing. There are some states that are allowing what we refer to as triples. A short trailer, when you see them running down the road, and there's 2 of them behind the tractor, those are called twins or pups or sets or 28-foot truck trailers. Though some states will allow those to run 3 deep, which would be, what's 56 and 28, 84 feet. The problem with that, and where you run into, is getting the trucks onto and off of the interstates. Once you get off of the interstate, there's no way you can navigate that much length in a city like Tyler.
Pull that to a Walmart parking lot.
Well, yeah, right. But it's probably coming. It's already here in some states. I don't know that I'm a big fan of much longer than 56 feet. I think from a safety standpoint. Go ahead, Art.
Does the Freight Lines Company own the rolling stock?
The question is, do the freight lines companies own the rolling stock? The answer to that question is yes and no. Our industry, we own everything that we have, we own. In fact, I'm proud to tell you that Southeastern Freight Lines is a debt-free company. So when I say we own them. But there are a lot of owner-operators that will lease their equipment from like a Schneider or a C.H. Robinson, some of those on the truckload side, which that's way different than the LTL side, which is where I'm from.
So then does that mean that the drivers are your employees?
For us?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, sir, Tyler.
You know those trucks are called mighty machines.
Mighty machines.
Yes.
Right.
Do mighty things for you and me.
That's right. They are. Bill Coates.
I have 2 questions. Do most truck drivers still go to, young drivers go to driving schools, or you train them? And number 2, what's the daily limit on these folks? How long they can drive till they have the rest?
Okay, yeah, 2 questions. Do we train our drivers when they go to a school? And then what's the daily limit? The daily limit is a driver can work up to 14 hours a day. He cannot drive 14 hours a day. He can only drive 10 hours, but he can work up to 14 hours a day. The second question on do we train them when they go to school? The answer to that is both of those are acceptable. We actually, Southeastern and several of the LTL carriers, we try to grow our drivers organically. When we hire somebody on the dock, they may start part-time. If it's an industry they'd like to be in, then we will encourage them to move out of that dock worker job into a truck driving role. And one of the things that we did in the last 2 years, actually the last 3 years now, we introduced these shorter trucks, little city units, or we refer to them as final mile trucks. They're a little bit bigger than a FedEx truck, or UPS truck, but not as big as a full-size tractor trailer. Those don't require CDL licenses. Two things. CDL drivers are more expensive, just to be blunt. But those smaller trucks give us a good training ground for someone who, if they really like what they're doing, they're going to want to move out of that truck into the full-size truck.
Do you see a problem with the industry not being able to allow new competitors into the market because it's so expensive, and all the other ones that are failing may start getting absorbed by the bigger guys to the point where there's only one or two players in the market?
The problem with, I guess the answer would be sure. It's super expensive, but it's also super expensive for a company to buy another company. So, for example, just to be as brutally honest as I can, the biggest players in our industry, they do get bigger. Those are FedEx Freight, Old Dominion, size a little bit bigger than we are. We, Southeastern, in our 13 states, no kidding, we own it in the Southeast. Nobody's even close to what we do in the Southeast, but we're not obviously not the biggest carrier because our footprint's not nationwide. So there's two things there. Number one, the LTL industry doesn't make enough money. There's not enough return. The ROI is just not there. I mean, unless you have a couple of $1 billion laying around and you're fine with making less than 5%. I don't know anybody that's fine with that. I mean, if we can make 5 cents on the dollar pre-tax, we've had a pretty good year.
Do you do random drug testing since they're your employees, and then how do you monitor like the 10-hour, or how does the industry monitor the 10-hour driving schedule?
We do the question is, do we do random drug testing? And the other part of that is how do we monitor how many hours the drivers work? For a company like Southeastern, yes, we do random drug testing, not just on drivers, but also on account managers. I've actually been asked to submit a sample.
Did you pass? He didn't answer that. Did you notice?
I've asked.
Okay.
It's flying colors. I'm here today.
Still there.
Only I ever made my mind. What was the other question?
The drug. Sleeping.
Sleeping,
How do you
okay.
monitor that 10-hour schedule? 10 hours of driving.
Well, I mentioned a little bit ago how that has changed. They used to allow 12 hours and cut it back to 10 hours. The DOT also came up with doing away with paper logs. Now we all use e-logs, electronic logs. We were actually using them before they were required. So our system will actually measure for you. There's some flaws in it, but we live with it. One of the flaws is if you're in a truck and it's moving more than 5 miles an hour, even if you're on a guard, and you're the driver of that truck, you're being timed. It's clicking away. I can tell you, I have actually been asked to run to Hallsville to pick up a driver, take a driver to a stranded truck because that driver was out of hours. That's how strict we are. We wouldn't even let the driver run another 45 minutes to get home. So,
Brett, I noticed when you had your maps of the hubs, of major hubs in the southeast, that Miami Beach or slightly north of there, is that like produce or going up to the rest of the United States or what? It seems like it's awful busy in that area.
I'll go back to that. I don't remember seeing much about it because freight going to Florida is all going in. It's very little that's coming out.
There you go. I mean,
That's not, well, it's just that's a big market.
yeah.
But all that freight you see in Miami or down in the Panhandle, the southern tip of Florida, that freight, that's all going in. If you want to get some really great freight rates, put a warehouse in South Florida and ship everything out. Because we have empty trailers coming out of Florida constantly.
Any more questions?
How long does a truck last? How long do y'all take?
How many miles?
I think the first one that Mr. Castle's got, I think we just retired that one about 18 months ago. Just kidding. They'll run a Class 8 truck will last about 1.2 million miles. So for us, we get hand-me-downs in Tyler. Dallas will get the new trucks. They'll put about 700,000 miles on them, send them to us. Now that's a lot of miles. But part of what we do and what most LTL carriers do, we have our own shops. We do a lot of our own maintenance. In fact, we even will take existing trailers to get more life out of a trailer. We have a trailer shop in Charlotte, North Carolina, where if we have a trailer that's in bad shape, we'll work it to where it ends up in Charlotte, and we'll actually rebuild the trailer. Because all that stuff is expensive, and when you're only making a nickel on the dollar, you don't really have a lot of excess money for capital expenditures, although we do spend millions a year. But I said, oh, yes, sir.
What's a good freight line to run these days?
Diesel is about 125,000.
That's just the truck.
That's the truck. That's just the truck. I think if they bring the electric trucks when they come to market, they're probably going to be a little bit more expensive. My biggest question on the electric trucks, remember the slide that had the 52 cents per gallon for taxes? Where are they going to tax us?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they'll figure it out.
Yeah, they'll figure it
I'm
out.
sorry, I should rephrase that. Where are they going to tax you? You already tax all that.
Any more toll roads?
Thanks a lot.
Before you start.
I just want to thank you guys for stepping up and we had an opening, unexpected opening for this week and Brad graciously stepped up, so I'd also like to give you a couple of South Tyler Road. And I was going to share with you, I hope you had that presentation ready, or did you put that together for us, Brad?
Actually, oh, sorry. Okay, so like last year, when Colleen cornered me and said, hey, why don't you do a program? I think that was the first time she sat at our table. And we actually, just so you know, we had to vote on whether or not we could sit at our table, and I was the only no vote. And so this is what we did. So she had asked me to help last summer, whenever it was. Oh, actually, it was a year ago. This is actually over a year old. I had to update.
So what I was going to share is if you would like to be a fill-in in case we have an opening, let Colleen know if you want to promote your business or an industry, because that was interesting information. Didn't know a lot of that. Beth texted me, she just want to let you guys know that we'll probably gear up for the spaghetti supper sales around the beginning of March. Colleen is working on coordinating, it's not going to be a traditional lunch meeting field trip, but we're talking about doing a off-site visit over to Camp B, which is a new local nonprofit that focuses on veterans. But it doesn't sound like we can do it during lunch because there's just a lot of limitations. Only 15 people can be there at a time or something along those lines. But we wanted to get out there and try to do that. So before we wrap up, did anybody have a favorite commercial from yesterday? The Jeep commercial? Yeah. Flat Matthew. That one made me chuckle. Any other favorite commercials? Did you guys watch it yesterday? No. Well, that being so. Brad, I'm going to put you on the spot because you're the first name I can think of. Would you lead us in the four-way test?
Sure. The four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First.
Is it true? Is it fair to all concerned? Will build better friendships.
Will be beneficial to all concerned. Did you see, John, did you see my note about the money for Polio Plus that we haven't gotten yet? A check to the Rotary Foundation. But you have all
So, okay, we just need to coordinate that. So, thank you.